We're going to hold off just for a moment. All right, I think all systems are go. Good morning, folks. This is Gary Clark, here to welcome you all to another Coffee Chats opportunity with Economic Alliance Snohomish County. And as things get queued up here, I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming Sound Transit to this Coffee Chats opportunity. And so we're going to have a presentation. We're going to listen to Sound Transit CEO. And then we're also going to have a few questions and answers. And then we'll give you a little bit of a snapshot on what's happening with Economic Alliance Snohomish County. And as you see here, we have our amazing slide up. As you know who I am, I want to make sure before I mention this slide that everyone remembers to put their name in the chat. Tell us where you're from, who you're with, what you're interested in. And as Peter goes into his presentation, if you have questions and comments, please put those in the chat as well. Now, I have one update that I am extremely excited about, and this is our actual annual meeting and economic forecast. We have an amazing speaker coming on April 27th. Her name is Marita Cheng, and she is actually one of Forbes' world's top 50 women in tech. And she's going to come and talk about the roboticist industry and the IA industry as well, inspiring technology and entrepreneurship. So remember, April 27th, join us. You can sign up if you're interested. We'll have some form of a link in the chat, hopefully later on in this presentation. But we also have our awards. We're going to be announcing some award-winning folks this year, and we actually have 4 of them. We have the John M. Fluke Award. We have the Henry M. Jackson Award. We have the Elson S. Floyd Award and Opportunity Lives Here Award, which is a brand new award. So please join us on April 27th in person. That's right, live and in person. Beyond that, though, I am really excited about our presenters today. We have Sound Transit here today, Ride the Wave. And as you can see here, that's right, Peter, we have the amazing Mr. Peter Rogoff, who is actually the chief executive officer for Sound Transit. And we have Eric Ashley Venkta, who is actually a past superhero here at Economic Alliance Snohomish County, and now the government and community relations manager, the North Corridor. So excellent pickup, Sound Transit. And in addition to that, we have Eric Whitstrand, who is the director of HCT Corridor Development. Now we're going to start off with these amazing gentlemen, and Peter, Eric, and the amazing group that we have here, Eric and Eric. Please take it away.
Well, thanks so much, Gary. And we really appreciate the opportunity to be invited. Let me just by way of introduction, I think everyone knows Eric Ashley Vinca, but Mr. Whitstrand is our new HCT, stands for High Capacity Transit Corridor. Some of you may have worked with Sandra Fan, who served in an acting capacity in this role, but we are really thrilled to now have a permanent position in the permanent person in the position. It's going to be critically important as we work to develop Everett Link. So we're really glad to have them on board, and you'll be seeing more of them in public meetings ahead. I am going to take literally the chat part of the coffee chat title because I've got a formal presentation here. I've got a script in front of me to read at you. I am less inclined to do that and much more inclined to get into a chat. So I'm going to go through the presentation fairly quickly because I just always find in these sit downs that it's the best conversation, and the way we best address the things that are really top of mind for folks is to invite people to ask questions and then see where the conversation goes from there. So I think, Eric, you're driving the deck. but forgive me if I go through fairly quickly. We do want to give you a sense of where we are. And as I'm sure you can appreciate in the current sort of COVID into post-COVID environment, the dynamic for really all transit agencies in America is just, it's dynamic. We've got ridership coming back. We've got ridership coming back in some places more than others. We've got revenues coming back, especially fare-related revenues, but maybe not in the intensity we hope or want. Construction has been a very big positive in that we have been able to stay about the business of our construction projects, even throughout COVID. We had a very brief slowdown, and then working very carefully with our partners in labor and our contractors, we were able to keep construction moving. We've also got a concrete strike that I will talk about that is, while centrally located in around King County, has impacted our Linwood Link project. And then we're very excited about launching the planning process to make Everett Link a full-blown planning project in which we engage with the public extensively on their preferences on what they want to see from the project and start moving this through the environmental process. So that's sort of the high-level things about what we're going to talk about. Why don't we go to the next slide? I should say before I get into this, this will be my last opportunity to meet with you in this role. I am stepping down at the end of May after about 6.5 years. A friend of mine shared with me in the industry that the average tenure in these jobs is 3 to 4 years. So I'm in year 7, and some days it feels like year 14. So I'm looking forward to taking a bit of a break. Brooke Bellman, who is my chief of staff, has been selected by the board to serve as the interim CEO after beginning in June. She's going to do a fantastic job, and it was my strong recommendation that the board select her in this role, since we're pretty much joined at the hip these days anyway. And meanwhile, the board is about the business of currently searching for a new CEO, and on that CEO search committee is both Dave Summers and Cassie Franklin. So there's good participation from Snohomish County in that process, and we could certainly check in with them on how that's going. This is a bit of a primer for those of you who may not be well familiar with us in sort of the founding structure of Sound Transit as it was established by the state now over 20 years ago. The area is divided into 5 sub-areas. You can see the map here. And the concept was that the funds raised in those sub-areas would be spent on projects in those sub-areas. There is a misunderstanding of that whole sub-area funding dynamic, in that a lot of people think that there's sort of like 5 separate lock boxes of money, and no dollar can be spent on anything outside the boundaries of, if that dollar was collected within those boundaries. And that's really not how it works. The way the sub-area equity approach actually works is dollars collected in a sub-area are intended to be spent on projects that benefit that sub-area. And as we now have the region now having adopted 3 ballot measures that having us extending projects all the way up to Everett, commuter rail all the way down to DuPont, at the end of the plant, light rail all the way out to Issaquah, as well as West Seattle and Ballard, and our light rails extensions all the way out, set up to Everett, but also down to Tacoma. Many people benefit from investments in terms of mobility throughout the region. So this is, like I said, not 5 separate lock boxes. Why don't we go to the next slide? These are the 3 voter-approved ballot measures, the largest being ST3 that passed in 2016. You can see in terms of its scope, each one was larger and more ambitious than the next. I think that was made possible by the fact that we were showing successes in what we were delivering, and voters became more comfortable voting for tax increases, because when they started seeing what other parts of the the taxing district were getting in terms of mobility, especially when it comes to light rail, they wanted more of it. And so we are now, importantly, we are the largest transit expansion program in the United States. We're actually bigger on the transit side than Los Angeles, even though they also had a very ambitious ballot measure passed in 2016. And my principal challenge since I arrived here at the very end of 2015 is not only to get the ballot measure accepted by the public, but also to turn the agency into one that can deliver on it. And while we, like all major capital constructors in a COVID environment and in this economy, are facing some headwinds, we're really proud of the progress that we've been making. And if, I'm sure many people on this call have driven the I-5 between Seattle and Linwood and seeing everything that's happening on the side of the highway. Increasingly, as you drive down south from Seattle to Federal Way, you'll see very much the same kind of infrastructure on the side of the highway going south. The Eastlink project, which will open either later this year or early in 2023, will really be a game changer because we'll open 10 stations overnight. So in the next 3 years, we're actually going to have the regional network where you can get from Linwood to Redmond to Federal Way, back and forth to the airport, 2 lines going in multiple different directions. And I think it really will change mobility in the region. The one thing that folks are seeing now is, while certain things have been slow to come back during the pandemic, traffic has come back. And that's before we're really at full strength, if you will. So when people ask me why the people of this region voted to raise their taxes so substantially to pay for this ST3 program, there's a whole lot of reasons, but the one I point to most frequently is the fact that traffic had more than doubled in just the 6 preceding years, and people wanted to pack out of it. And we're preparing to deliver that. And we're seeing, just with each of these extensions, just the extension we just had that we opened in October, 3 stations up to Northgate, has dramatically changed our operating profile. Time was that Westlake in downtown Seattle was always the #1 most popular light rail stop for the longest time. It has now quickly been thrust into 3rd place, with the University District station being the busiest station we have, Northgate being the 2nd busiest station, and Westlake 3rd. And that is in part because the university is fully open, and downtown, I think you can argue, downtown Seattle is not yet fully open. But it just kind of shows that these extensions are kind of powering the progress of the system. And I think as you see Eastlink and Linwood and Federal Way open, you're going to see similar results where people are flocking to these new services and finding that a transit option works for them. Why don't we go to the next slide? This is really a snapshot of the whole expansion plan. I mean, the goal is to get to 116 miles of light rail, which will stretch all the way from Everett down to Tacoma, include West Seattle, Ballard, head out even beyond where we are on the east side to a separate line that will serve Issaquah. There's also a bus rapid transit line, which I think is very, very important in that it will serve Linwood and connect folks to Bothell and then down to Bellevue. The idea was that we can't run efficiently or affordably light rail to hit every major destination point. But if you have real bus rapid transit, where buses are coming every 10 minutes, are in their own designated lane or in the so-called hot lanes on 405, you can move people very quickly to a light rail stop. So the 405 BRT program, or what we're calling STRIDE now, will operate, like I said, not only from Linwood to Bothell down to Bellevue, but then that's the STRIDE North line. There'll also be a STRIDE South line that will run from Bellevue to Renton to Burien. But importantly, the 405 line will encounter light rail at 3 different places, at Linwood, Bellevue, and at Tukwila. The 522 stride line will connect you very rapidly off of 522 to light rail at Shoreline. And the idea is to provide you a very quick and reliable trip to a quick and reliable light rail line. And obviously we are continuing to deliver our Sounder commuter rail service. I think when we get to the ridership data, this has been the slowest to come back in the post-COVID environment, not surprisingly, because the Sounder service really is very much a traditional sort of 9 to 5 commuting pattern, or really it's more like 8 to 4 or 8 to 6. But we are still optimistic that Sounder passengers will be returning to the service soon. Why don't we go to the next slide? So here's what's happening on ridership. As I said, things are quite dynamic. Really notably, light rail is at 83% of pre-COVID levels on ridership. But equally notably, as I pointed out before, a lot of that is being driven by the expansion in Northgate and the university. I just returned, we just had the first sort of national transit conference where I could gather with all of my colleagues around the industry, around the country. And it was quite a celebration. People were thrilled to see each other in person again after 3 years. But I can tell you that all of my colleagues around the country would give their left leg to have 83% of pre-COVID ridership on any of their services, because that's really the high water mark. The rest of the system is a mixed bag. Like I said, if you go to Sounder, we're only at 20% of pre-COVID ridership, in part because I think this will really highly depend on two things. One, when major employers call everyone in back to the office, and importantly, two, to what extent folks will be returning to the office. Folks who are Sounder commuters have those longer commutes. And importantly, we discovered during COVID the extent to which one can still be productive. In some cases, like a 3% transit, more productive, not commuting. But we also discovered that you lose things by not commuting. So I think, every major employer who has the flexibility to not call their employees in full time are in a discovery phase about what the new normal can or should be optimally for their business. And we are no different at Sound Transit. We are giving folks the option who can, based on their job description, to come in 2 days or less, in which case they'll be working in hotel space. If they come in 3 days a week or more, they'll keep their offices or their cubes. But importantly, we're going to see where we're at in 6 months and see if this is working for the company or not. And I tend to think that that's where we all are. So all by way of saying that as a service provider who doesn't want to put out unnecessary levels of service, but also wants to continue to serve those people who will use us intensively. And let's remember, there are certain folks who used us consistently, the essential workers who we served throughout the pandemic. We need to make, we're here for all of those riders, and we need to make sure that we're turning out the right level of service. So, when it comes to service planning, we, like all transit agencies in the country right now, need to be extraordinarily nimble. And these numbers, like I said, if there's one word that comes away from all this, it's dynamic, because it's a dynamic environment that we're monitoring carefully. Why don't we go to the next slide? As I said earlier, we are really moving forward, and construction in some unique and unexpected ways was made easier during the pandemic. Just to give you an example, on some of, as you've all seen, a lot of the work at Linwood Link is happening immediately adjacent to the highway. Well, we had agreements with WashDOT on when we could take the far right lane for safety and buffer purposes to do that construction on the side of the highway. When traffic was so low because we were at the height of COVID, WashDOT was willing to let us close that lane for a longer period of time. We actually got more work in the ground sooner because of COVID, and our ability to keep construction up and moving, albeit with new safety protocols for all the construction workers. which were very important to attend to. And I will tell you that unfortunately, a lot of that benefit in some cases being expedited on our projects has been undermined by the concrete strike, but I'll get to that later. But I think another important thing that has also been kept on track, and we're also very proud of, is given the absolute critical shortage of affordable housing in the region, the legislature, as part of the ST3 plan, enabled us to not be a builder of affordable housing, but a facilitator of affordable housing, especially affordable housing near our transit services. Because many of you know, when you build out these high capacity transit services that people want to be near, it changes a community. And quite frankly, in many instances, it gentrifies a community, and people who have lived in and around that community for a long time can get priced out of the community when transit is introduced. So one of the ways that Sound Transit seeks to mitigate that impact is by actually working with nonprofit developers to develop affordable housing in immediate adjacency to our new stations. And as is pointed out here, we are at various levels of development of 1,500 units. That will not solve the affordable housing problem in the Puget Sound region, but we're happy to be a contributor to the solution. Some of these are really state of the art. In just, I think about in 2 months, we will open up more than 250 units within 30 feet of the Roosevelt station that we just opened in October. And many of those are at 40 to 60% of average median income. There is going to be a child care center and an after-school center right in the building. And it's going to provide a great residential opportunity for people who frankly otherwise wouldn't be able to, afford to live in the Roosevelt community anymore. And that's just one example. We have more than 300 units, especially for veterans and the elderly, affordable units going on in First Hill. We are working on TOD opportunities in Linwood and Federal Way, as well as on the east side. And we were very grateful to receive a $100 million contribution from Amazon, who specifically said that they wanted that money put to work to help us build affordable housing units adjacent to transit in the next 5 years. So that's just an important part of our program that we're very proud of. Why don't we go to the next slide? So where are we on Linwood Link? I mean, you can see it. Things are progressing at pace. We have had challenges now. I'll get into this when we get into the concrete strike. But one of the great challenges we sometimes have is when people see all of that heavy civil infrastructure go up, and they see trackway go up, and they see stations being built, there's a tendency to say, oh, well, surely the train is coming in just 6 months. And the answer is actually it's not. You're seeing the outer shell of a very complex system for which we need to do very extensive electrical work after all of the structure is built. We then have to go through extensive testing, crew training. Our target, I should say, as of this moment, is that we will open in 2024. But as I'll explain when we get into the concrete strike, I mean, all of the service delivery dates are going to need to be subject to reevaluation when we know that the concrete strike is finally ended. But for those of you who aren't familiar with the project, 2 stations in Shoreline, one in Montlake Terrace at the transit center there, and obviously at the Linwood Transit Center, which is, as anyone who's been in that neighborhood will see, is undergoing a very dramatic transformation as we speak. Let me go to the next slide. So when I say we are the largest transit expansion program in America, this pretty much summarizes it. And I will be honest, it's about, I sometimes feel that this job is about spinning 7 plates instead of 3 plates in the air at the same time, because each one of these projects is a substantial transit expansion that, the vast majority of transit agencies in America would be very thrilled to have one of these. This region is really playing catch-up ball, which is why we're deploying so much new transit so quickly. And Sound Transit is sought to grow into an agency that can deliver on every one of these projects with quality, and giving every one of the impacted communities the best possible service when it opens. And by and large, I will not say that it's gone without a hitch, but it's going quite well. Our biggest hitch right now is the Hilltop Tacoma project. That is the only one of these projects listed here that is actually over budget. And that really relates to the fact that when we ripped up the streets of Tacoma, we found out that the utilities were not where they were mapped to be. And therefore we needed to go back and actually do a redesign of the project. Subsequently, long-standing residents of Tacoma have said to us, you know, if you'd asked me, I would have told you they weren't where they were mapped to be, but we didn't ask. We kind of trusted the Tacoma City utility maps to be somewhat accurate. They were not. But other than that, all these other projects, if you asked me a few months ago, the status of these projects, I say every other project is on budget and on schedule. Can't say on schedule right now because quite frankly, we don't know. Northgate is obviously open. But this concrete strike, like I said, and I might as well talk about it now. Maybe it's on a subsequent slide, but the concrete strike is just something that I don't think any of us could have predicted, and we didn't have systems in place to control for. And this is what I mean by that. We're very proud that we do all of our major construction projects through project labor agreements. And for those of you who aren't familiar with project labor agreements or PLAs, it's a signed agreement with the building trades unions in which we guarantee certain conditions and a steady flow of work and rules by which, what crafts we will use and the fact that it will be all unionized labor. And what we get in return, other than in addition to obviously the highest quality workforce, is predictability. There is a no strike clause in the project labor agreement. And as such, we can progress with these projects as we have with prior projects with a level of predictability and not have to worry about labor disruptions. Well, that project labor agreement does not apply to the drivers who deliver concrete. They don't work for our direct contractors. Our contractors go out to the market to procure the concrete they need, and drivers deliver it. Well, the Teamster drivers that have been delivering concrete in and around King County have been on strike now we're well into the 4th month. And as you might imagine, there is some schedule float in every one of these projects, but that schedule float is for all kinds of reasons, but no one could anticipate a cessation of delivery of concrete for months at a time. As a result, we have found that we've got projects. I'm not going to say they're stopped dead. You can do as many workarounds as you can for a while to try to advance the project in ways that do not require concrete. But at a certain point, you can only make so much progress. And we're now really starting to feel the pinch. There's been a slight loosening of the situation where the Teamsters have agreed to go back to 2 of the suppliers, Cadman and Salmon Bay. And we have gotten 1 major delivery of concrete to the Linwood Transit Center for a pour last week. We were glad to get it. But the other reality is we have a very lengthy backlog of not just at Sound Transit, but Sound Transit, WashDOT, and all of the private construction going on in and around the area that has been waiting on concrete for some time. So even if the strike were to be solved tomorrow in its 4th month, it would take months to catch up to delivering all the concrete that everybody needs. And as such, that's why I say I can tell you that all but one of these is on or below budget. I can no longer say that they're all on time because I don't know until the strike is really resolved and we have a good flavor for when the concrete deliveries will be restored and how quickly. Can I say with certainty what the delivery dates will be? So more to come on that, obviously. Next slide. This is just groovy pictures of everything we're doing. Why don't we go through these quickly, Eric? More groovy pictures. This is obviously the work at Woodwood. This is the discussion of the concrete strike. I think I've already gone through that, but just to give you a flavor, we are now behind on 44,000 cubic yards of concrete. So if you lined up concrete trunks bumper to bumper, it would run like all the way from Montlake Terrace to SeaTac Airport. That's how far behind we are. Next slide. Realignment. This is an important process that the board completed back in August. It is something that's required in the RCW, and what it really comes down to is when the agency knows that we cannot deliver the projects on the schedule or at the cost that were in the voter approved plan, we need to go through a process to realign the schedules of delivering those projects to one where we know to be affordable. And I think it's the people who put that in the statute, it's a very wise disciplining tool to make sure that, and having worked at the national level on the transit industry, you see folks who, frankly, are not very transparent about how things are really going with their capital program. And this really is a transparency mechanism where which requires us, when we know that conditions are not going to be conducive to delivering things on time, whether it's because of costs or other challenges, or a depletion of revenues, as happened in 2009. The board went through a realignment process in 2010 because of depleted revenues from the Great Recession. We just completed another one in August. Was started off really as a concern about revenues during COVID. Revenues didn't actually emerge to be as much the problem, but actually what did evolve as a very significant problem is project costs, largely because of a couple of factors. One, we had substantially increased estimated costs for right-of-way, the property we need to purchase. But as anyone who's bought or sold either business property or a home in the region knows, the costs of property have spiked and continue on an upward trajectory even during COVID, where property that we're procuring is coming in way more expensive than was originally estimated. So the combination of that and other discoveries about the complications of building and the expense of building in some of our more urbanized areas required us to discuss with the board growing costs. The board realigned the program to basically with two schedules involved. One is the schedule that we know to be affordable. And in this case, they did not throw any of the major projects over the side. They just moved the delivery dates of those projects. And they quite deliberately developed two schedules. One that we could tell the public we know to be affordable. The other is what we call the target schedule. And that is, opportunities where if we could, for example, get additional assistance in a variety of forms, either out of Olympia or from the new bipartisan infrastructure law passed in Washington, D.C., we are going to continue to move these projects at pace as if we can deliver them on the target schedule. So if economic fortunes improve, if for whatever reasons costs come in lower than expected, if we can get additional grant money from Washington, D.C., for example, that we are still going to shoot to deliver things on the original target schedules. Why don't we go to the next slide? These are the major differences between the affordable, what the ballot measure says versus what would be affordable and what is not. I think importantly for Everett Link, you can see that the target schedule is just delayed just by 1 year. But importantly, we are going to get the 2041 date is getting all the way to Everett. We are actually, thanks to former Everett council member and our vice chair of our board, then vice chair of our board, Paul Roberts, he structured an amendment to be sure that we at least could get to Southwest Everett much sooner than 2041. I believe, I'm looking at Eric, but I believe the date is 2037 to get that far, just a day later, just a year later than originally planned. And we would hope to improve on that if we could shrink the affordability gap of that project. Why don't we go to the next slide? This is just a brief conversation about where we were on Everett Link. I will tell you it's very exciting because after all the talk for literally decades, this is now starting to get real. We've got a project, we've got project director, we've got a public process to start the planning process. And I think there'll be a growing enthusiasm. These are the general outlines of the project. It is by far and away our longest project at 16 miles. There are 6 stations to be built, as well as one currently unfunded station that could be built if the revenues are found. It also requires the construction of a new operations and maintenance facility. We have currently 2 operations and maintenance facilities, one for light rail and one, the operational one in Seattle. We just opened a new one on the east side in anticipation of opening light rail to the east side. The board has selected a preferred alternative for the location of one to the south in Federal Way. But there's also one that will need to be located in the north. That is effectively part of this project. And there'll be new parking that expands as part of this as well. Why don't we go to the next slide? This is some background on the operations and maintenance facility. You'll hear discussion about where this can and should be located. Some people get very concerned about when we say we're going to operate, locate an operations and maintenance facility in their region, because they have this vision of it being incredibly noisy and dirty industrial facilities. For all of those people, we routinely invite them to come to our existing operations and maintenance facilities and see all the things that they are not. In fact, we invite them to come at 1 or 2 in the morning when they are at their busiest to see how dirty they're not and how noisy they are not. But one good thing about this, this will be one of our larger and busier ones. It will support more than 450 high-skilled, high-paid jobs in the North End. And we'll have capacity for as many as 150 vehicles. So, and this obviously needs to open before the service opens. So you'll see this not on, on a somewhat faster track, as the target is to have it open in 2034. Go to the next slide. This is the project schedule for Everett Link, and as you can see, we're at the very beginning of the process, but we're now putting it into our full-blown project development schedule. I just submitted the paperwork to admit this sort of next generation of projects into project development with the Federal Transit Administration. I was able to talk to the Federal Transit Administrator in DC about it. The initial paperwork was for West Seattle and Ballot, just because that was going to take longer, but signaled to them that we will be submitting the identical paperwork for Tacoma, our Tacoma Dome extension, as well as Everett Link later in the year. And that gets the ball rolling in terms of discussions with the federal government about cost sharing on these projects. Next slide. So this pretty much says, where we're at right now, and there's a lot of excitement because we are now have a participatory process for the public to engage in early scoping. This is the earliest part of the environmental process, what we call the level 1 analysis, and engaging the public. And you'll see more and more coming out on social media on that, and more information on our website as the project takes shape. Next slide. That's really all I had. It actually took longer than I'd hoped because I want to give plenty of opportunity for people to ask questions. But thanks for having me again, and happy to answer any questions that anyone has.
Outstanding. All right. Well, a wealth of knowledge there. Thank you, Peter. We do have some questions queued up here, but I want to go ahead and invite first and foremost those of you who are on, which you have a bit over 100 folks on the Zoom right now. I think we peaked at maybe 111, 120. I'm not sure, somewhere in that range, Peter. At any rate, those of you on the chat, if you would put into the chat questions for the two Erics and Peter, and then also just some additional comments. What's that initial buzzword that comes to mind when you think of sound transit? We like to put those in the chat as well. Peter and Eric, I'd like to ask the first question that I have on my list, which is, what factors go into consideration in choosing future routes and station locations for our region? So you spoke briefly about some of the upcoming items, but what factors go into choosing future routes?
So big difference between routes and station locations. So we've got Sound Transit is charged with building only the projects that the voters have approved. If there's going to, and I'm going to be quite honest, it spooks me a little bit because I hear conversations about ST4 out there, and we have got our hands full. I want to promise you, with just delivering on ST3. It already is the most ambitious expansion program in the country, in terms of additional routes, that really comes from a regional planning process in which folks start speaking up what next projects they think are the next natural extension. It isn't somewhat, it is not governed by, but it is the major regional plan as developed by the PSRC plays into this discussion. And there also needs to be a regional appetite and a cold-hearted look at our finances. What is affordable and how much of further tax revenue will be needed, and what other sources are available. And as won't surprise you, we're looking to capitalize on every available opportunity that the bipartisan infrastructure law might present. And spend an extra week in DC just having meetings on that before this conference I attended, just to try to tee up the agency to benefit from that. We just got good news yesterday where the Biden administration is proposing in its budget that got released yesterday to accelerate the federal payments for Linwood and Federal Way. The way things worked in the Trump administration, we signed a multi-year agreement where even though the project was scheduled to open in 2024, the federal government wouldn't pay off its share until 2028. Well, now they're looking to expedite that, which is great for us. It lowers our borrowing costs and frees up capacity in the federal wallet to help us with the next generation of projects, whether it's Tacoma or Everett. But station locations is a different issue. It pertains, so we have, I think, illustrative examples of where we think the stations would be located when we put the project to the voters. But then we have to have, a real planning process that uses all of the rules of the environmental process and extensive conversations with the community and the municipalities about what is the optimal location for these stations. And a number of things go into that. One, obviously, constructability and cost. But others include where we're going to be able to maximize the benefit for the riding public. And I know this is a rich conversation in terms of the stations anticipated in and around Painfield or the Boeing plant and the residential communities adjacent to it. And who are we trying to serve? What is the market? And how do they best get there? I mean, I will say this, we've had a very great partnership with Community Transit and the planning of our light rail locations with their Swift expansion for BRT, because a lot of people are going to access light rail boarding Swift buses, taking them directly to a light rail station. So we've been, supporters of each other's federal asks for that. because it really is, a network. It's not just one service versus another. But that is something that we go through the planning process on. The public has extensive opportunities to comment. We model what we think the ridership is going to be for these different station locations. But I would, especially when cost is a factor, remember that in this Realigned program, we have a target date and an affordable date. The more affordable the decision, the sooner we can deliver it. So we really need to avoid the temptation to just dream on paper without any thought to expense. We want to make the right decision, the affordable decision, and also be able to deliver the whole program as soon as possible.
Okay. Well, I think there's an additional question that I just got popped into the chat, so I'll go there before asking another question legislatively. Someone mentioned that they rode light rail from Northgate to downtown and back, and obviously mentioned that ST's work is impressive. However, they noticed that about half the people were not paying or not tapping the Orca card. And can you explain what the decision process was to make the payment of fares an honor-based system? And are there other major rail systems that are not utilizing the turnstiles and require fare payment?
No, it's a really good question. And it's quite frankly, it's a significant problem and one that we were talking with the board about now. I don't know how to put it more explicitly than this. Word is out among riders that you don't need to pay. And we are seeing while passenger counts are coming back, fare revenue is not coming back in the same intensity as one would expect. And I think that's a function of a number of different factors. One, there was a time during COVID when we had to suspend fares entirely. But we were determined to continue to provide service to essential workers. Two, there's financial stress out there that I think people are looking to, where they can get away with not paying. There's a temptation to do so. So we are, in the coming month, just this next month, having a series of measures that I've recommended that the board take to get us back in the business of issuing fines and citations to riders in an equitable and fair-minded way, which is to say, there's no percentage in throwing the book and getting folks in legal trouble for not paying a $2 or $3 fare if they genuinely don't have it. But I have put forward a suite of options, which includes lowering. We have a product called Orca Lift, which if you aren't low income, you tap your card like everybody else, but you just pay less when you do. And it's actually a national model that a lot of transit agencies are beginning to look at. I proposed lowering the Orca Lift fare as a way of dealing with this issue of folks who may be genuinely financially stressed to be able to continue to ride, but also be compliant. We are proposing to restore fines and citations, but also have alternative mechanisms to, rather than pay a fine, to be able to load money on your Orca card, to sign up for Orca Lift, to commit yourself to paying in the future. We're trying to get back into, get the system back out there with a pattern of compliance. And I'm also proposing to double the number of fare ambassadors we have out there, because part of the problem is the likelihood that you're even going to be encountered by any of these fare ambassadors is so low that you can board, never be asked whether you've paid, disembark, and never encounter anyone. Mm-hmm. We think we can, we hope we can get fare compliance rates to improve by just heightening the likelihood that you're going to encounter someone who's going to ask. Mm-hmm. And make an inquiry about whether you've paid or not. But it's a source of concern because, fare revenue, while a relatively small portion of our budget, is one of the few areas of the budget that the board controls, and plays into what revenue is available to deliver, what expansions and how quickly we can deliver them.
Excellent, Peter. Definitely a vantage point that folks on the chat are interested in hearing about. And I know there are maybe one additional question there in the chat. I'll leave that one open for now because we have just a little bit of time left.
So Gary, I have to admit, like, the chat drives me crazy. I've decided that the chat is ageist, like, because I can't talk and look and read at the same time.
Oh yeah.
But so I'm going to let you tell me what's in there rather than looking at
myself. Well, it's just a follow-up question to what you were speaking about, and I guess we can address it really quick. It's from one of our STEM staffers, Alyssa Jackson, just asked, don't some people pay with the app and therefore don't need to tap the board? So
yes, they can. I'd love to tell you that so many people are using the app. That explains why people aren't tapping, but the numbers don't bear that out. But she's quite correct. There is that opportunity, and we wish, frankly, more people would use the app.
I see Karen on screen and is surprised by that comment. So at any rate, we have a follow-up question. This is tied to legislation. So how did this legislative session affect Sound Transit positively or negatively? And did you get any new federal funding? So you touched on it lightly earlier, but do you have any thoughts on this?
Sure. Well, I'll take them in order. Olympia was kind of a mixed bag. We sought, when we've got this affordability gap, the entire board wrote to the legislature to ask the legislature to help us fill it by at least giving us, for example, access to the state grant programs that the new transportation package just created, or just expanded. We felt that the expansion was so large that we wouldn't be working, a hardship on anyone by at least allowing Sound Transit to participate as we used to be allowed to participate. They did make us eligible for just one small program, which is, a good first step, and we're grateful for it. Not as expensive as we wanted. And our participation in that, like those of the other transit agencies in the state, will be dependent on whether the board adopts a policy to make the system fare-free for folks 18 years old and younger. And that's something that impacts transit agencies all over the state. We did, and we were successful and grateful. There was a measure that was put in a couple of years ago, really at the then chair of the Transportation Committee, Senator Hobbs. That was really quite punitive. That was kind of overcharging us many times over in paying for the Department of Licensing to collect our motor vehicle excise tax. They finally did a study on how much it really cost the Department of Licensing and set our payment level to that. So we appreciated that very much on getting that something more closely approximating what it really cost them, rather than just using Sound Transit as a funding offset for the Department of Licensing's operating costs. That was a positive step. There was a provision that allowed for what's called, I believe the phrase is special districts, but it would allow a subpart of the Sound Transit taxing district with the board's approval. It would have to be the approval of the entire board to have a separate vote on additional taxes, either to help finish ST3 projects or fund ST4 projects. As I said, I don't really think the agency is ready to start taking on ST4 projects. But if those more localized regions want to help us finance the completion of ST3 projects more quickly, we would certainly be supportive of that. So there was one other small but meaningful thing that we were able to get a pilot program. We asked for permanent authority. But right now, literally, when there is a vehicle parked on our tracks, we have to go through the municipality to get it removed. we were able to get authority from the legislature to allow us to remove the vehicle ourselves to quit blocking trains. Washington, D.C., the federal funding process is a lengthy one. You go through multiple years of review. One thing we are going to do for sure is ask for higher federal matches. We were successful in getting these full funding grant agreements for Linwood Link and for Federal Way Link during the Trump administration, but the Linwood Link federal percentage is just 36%. For Federal Way, it's only 25%. The law allows federal funding up to 60%. With all the additional money now in the bipartisan infrastructure law, we are going to be coming in for much larger percentages for our next generation of projects. So we are optimistic there, but it's a lengthy process. We obviously will benefit from additional formula funding for transit, as all transit agencies in the country will, as a result of the bipartisan infrastructure law. But the formula funding alone won't help, won't make a material difference in our financing of our expansion projects. That comes from another program, this capital investment grant program, where we get these discrete multi-year grant agreements that we're working on.
Well, Peter, this has been amazing. We have just a few moments left, and so I'd like to bypass our last few questions. Although we want to know in the future if there's any way that people can find ways to participate and support on an advisory board of some sort. If that information can be thrown into the chat. I see Eric is doing excellent work there already. One question to you as you wrap up, just to give you kind of an opportunity for closing remarks. It's clear that Sound Transit has done some amazing work throughout our region and our area and across throughout the state, obviously. But it rings very true to me that you've just made it clear that Sound Transit isn't simply about transportation and assistance, but you've mentioned housing, you've mentioned quality of life aspects. So in your tenure, can you just give us a synopsis of how you feel about your efforts with Sound Transit, and just leave us with some amazing parting thoughts on your tenure and what you look for in the future?
Well, I think it won't surprise you. There is a very strong, committed staff at Sound Transit that loves when we get to the point of actually providing expanded service. The way I describe it, and I talk to staff about this all the time, we could get beaten up in the media, as all transit agencies do. And sometimes we get beaten up more dramatically because we're trying to do really ambitious things. And that's okay. And it helps, a lot of our leaders are resilient people. We know that everyone's trying really hard to get things done as quickly as they can, as safely as we can, as efficiently as we can. When we have an opening and people love the expanded service, folks in the neighborhood who work at Sound Transit get to go to the neighborhood potluck and hold their head a little bit higher, right? As you might imagine, Sound Transit is such a node of sometimes of controversy and concern. You don't really get to go to a community dinner around here without someone saying, "Hey, you work for Sound Transit. Why don't you do this, that, or the other thing?" Right? Transit is a little bit like education policy. Anyone who's ever been to school thinks they have an idea on how the school should be run. And anyone who's ridden a bus has an idea on how transit agencies should be run. And that's okay. We're accustomed to that, right? I wanted to leave people with things, we really do have a great staff that's committed to delivering this. And the next few years, the concrete strike notwithstanding, it's really going to be quite amazing. Eastlink is going to be 10 stations overnight, and I think will be a fundamental change to the map, as will getting farther north and south. And all of that's going to happen in a comparatively short period of time, within the next 3 years. This is the network that the region's been talking about for decades. I mean, some of these projects were first rejected by the voters in 1968. I was 8. Gary, I think you were nothing. So, you know, it is going to be very exciting. And while I will be with the agency, you know, Dina and I are staying in the region, and I'm really looking forward to watching it happen from the sidelines. So it's going to be awesome.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks for all the work you've done and the work that will continue because of your efforts. Thank you, Eric and Eric, for joining us. I just want to say really quickly that your background looks a little bit between a mix of the Reading Rainbow and and something else I've seen as a kid. So that is really awesome.
They're riding the wave.
Yeah, riding the wave is what I see. Big splash. So let's open this up to our gallery piece after I give you a quick update that homelessness and recovery solutions are April 5th, and that's our coffee chat coming up. We want to do our salute to Peter and his team, as well as the Sound Transit folks. So if everyone would just grab their coffee cups for Peter and Eric, and let's show them the way. We really appreciate your information, your input and impact. Economic Alliance Snohomish County, thank you for the great information. Coffee chats next week. And please, please have a great day. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Sound Transit. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for having us.